In 1900, William Saunders Crowdy established the Church of God and Saints of Christ, or COGSC, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, based on a vision he had years earlier. He claimed that God had revealed to him that Black people were descendants of ancient Israelites. Over the following century, numerous movements would make the same claim. Where did this idea come from? And more importantly, what does it mean? You are watching Black Belief. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a new video. Isrealism speculates about the modern ethnic identity of the descendants of the so-called Lost 10 Tribes of Israel. The earliest reference to Israelism was found in a book by a Huguenot magistrate entitled The 10 Lost Tribes, which was published in 1590. The text pioneered a theory called Anglo-Israelism or British Israelism, which claimed that Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Scandinavian, Germanic, and associated cultures were direct descendants of ancient Israelites. Various other works reference the idea well into the 1600s and 1700s. In 1795, the most famous proponent of this theory was Richard Brothers, who published a book called Revealed Knowledge of the Prophecies and Times. Brothers claimed that he was a descendant of Israelites, and many other Brits were as well. He claimed that these Brits could be restored to Jerusalem if they submitted to his leadership. Brothers was eventually committed to an asylum. The most modern version of Anglo-Israelism was articulated by a Scottish man named John Wilson in his book called Our Israelitish Origin, which was published in 1840. Wilson began holding a series of lectures about his theory that Northern European peoples were descendants of Israelites. The idea stems from the mystery of the so-called Lost 10 Tribes of Israel. In the scriptures of Abrahamic religions, there are 12 tribes of Israel which represent the children and grandchildren of the patriarch Jacob. These tribes established a kingdom where each tribe was given its own territory, but the kingdom was rarely at peace. Various wars and conflicts arose as different tribes disagreed with who was chosen as king or with the king's mandates. According to legend, King Solomon, the son of King David and a member of the tribe of Judah, had a servant named Jeroboam who rebelled against him. Jeroboam was told by a prophet that due to the Israelites' disobedience, God would give him leadership over the majority of the tribes. However, in keeping with the promise God made to King David, God would allow Solomon to remain in control of a smaller kingdom. When Solomon found out about Jeroboam's plot, he ordered that the traitor be killed. Subsequently, Jeroboam fled to Egypt for safety. Solomon eventually died, and his son Rehoboam ascended to the throne. Jeroboam returned from exile with his followers and demanded that Rehoboam agree to lighter taxes for his group. Rehoboam refused, and 10 tribes broke away from the kingdom in protest. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin were a part of the southern kingdom under King Rehoboam. To cement his power over the north, King Jeroboam created new religious practices like the worship of golden calves, and told his subjects that they were no longer required to make pilgrimages to the temple in Jerusalem as God had previously commanded. These new ideas religiously and culturally isolated the northern tribes from their southern brethren. This all continued until the 8th century BC, when the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom and deported all of its inhabitants beyond what is now known as Syria. In the 6th century BC, a client state of Assyria, Babylon, rebelled against the empire. The kingdom of Judah, then under the leadership of a king named Josiah, attempted to resist Babylonian rule. In response, the Babylonian king, King Nebuchadnezzar II, invaded Judah and deported some of its most educated and influential citizens. The Christian Bible tells the story of characters like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were taken captive as punishment for Judah's rebellions. This sequence of events happened many times: rebellion followed by punishment. Finally, around 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar had had enough. He invaded Jerusalem, killed millions, and destroyed the Israelites' temple. Those who survived were deported, but the king left behind very poor Judeans to work as menial laborers. As priests and other educated captives tried to understand why these defeats had happened, they began writing about their visions from God. Priests like Ezekiel believed that God was telling him that Israelites would one day return to Jerusalem. According to tradition, the Babylonian exile lasted for 70 years until King Cyrus of Persia allowed the Judeans to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. No such reprieve would ever be granted for the northern tribes. After hundreds of years, they intermarried with various non-Israelite peoples. However, prophecies elsewhere in the scriptures promised that one day all Israelite tribes would be reunited. These prophecies fed curiosity, obsession, and conspiracies over the next few thousand years about what may have happened to the lost 10 tribes and who their modern descendants might be. A teenager named Edward Hine attended John Wilson's lectures and was inspired to formulate his own version of Anglo-Israelism. He claimed that only English-speaking people were descendants of Israelites, and not Northern European people at large. He published a book of 47 pieces of alleged biblical evidence supporting his theory.
And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn, put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused, and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh.
Edward Hine claimed that Ephraim, whom Jacob called great, represents Great Britain, who has spawned a group of nations, while Manasseh represents the United States. He and several other rivals started Anglo-Israelism organizations to promulgate their theories. To find a new audience for his teachings, he went to the United States in 1884, where he gave lectures across the Northeast. When it comes to Black Hebrew Israelism in the United States, there have been conflicting reports about who first put forth the theory. It is commonly said that a man named Frank Cherry established a Black Israelite church in 1886. This claim came from Cherry himself and has not been substantiated. The earliest start date for Frank Cherry's group, Church of the Living God, the Pillar Ground of Truth for All Nations, is 1915. Instead, historians have highlighted a man named Bishop William Christian, who started the Churches of the Living God in Arkansas in 1889. Bishop Christian was one of the earliest Black preachers to claim that the biblical prophets were Black and Black Americans were descendants of Israelites. Interestingly, William Saunders Crowdy was ordained by Bishop Christian for the Churches of the Living God in August of 1897. Today, the Church of God and Saints of Christ claims that Crowdy had his vision from God in 1892, started his first Kansas congregation in 1897, and finally moved his church to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1900. However, Crowdy's ordination by Bishop Christian and the similarities between the two men's doctrines indicate that Crowdy experimented with his message in Kansas before moving to Philadelphia in order to start a new church, which probably borrowed heavily from Bishop Christian's movement. William Crowdy, Frank Cherry, and others most likely backdated the beginnings of their movements so that the movements appeared older and more legitimate than their rivals. William Saunders Crowdy died on August 4, 1908, just a few years after he had purchased 40 acres of land in Suffolk, Virginia for his church. This land is now used for the organization's international headquarters. Frank Cherry died in 1963, and his son assumed leadership of his church in Philadelphia, which still stands today. Christians and secular observers alike have criticized Anglo-Israelism for its ahistorical, anti-scientific approaches. The group claims that the 10 lost tribes gained their freedom from the Assyrians, maintained their ethnic religious identity, and made their way to Europe, leaving evidence of their journey in the names of landmarks along their route. For example, they claim that the names Danube, Dardanelles, Denmark, and Danelaw were all named after the tribe of Dan. Aside from the fact that this claim is rejected by credible experts of all historical disciplines, the group struggles to find examples of other tribe names that were similarly left in the names of landmarks along the alleged journey of the tribes. The movement often uses resemblances between words as proof of their meaning. They claim that the word British comes from the Hebrew words berith and ish, meaning covenant man. However, historians point out that Britain derives its name from an earlier label, Baratanic, which means 10 isles and is a reference to the large quantities of tin that used to be mined there. Most disturbing is their claim that the only tribe in Palestine at the time of Jesus' crucifixion was the tribe of Judah, from which modern Jews are descended. Therefore, they conclude that only Jews are responsible for the death of Christ, while they, who insist on claiming Israelite heritage, are completely innocent. The ideology aims to inject Great Britain and the United States into the biblical narrative in order to cast the colonial activities of each nation as a part of God's divine plan. Anglo-Israelicists fought to interpret the Bible in ways that justified white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and manifest destiny. The emergence of Black Hebrew Israelism was inspired by different motivations. The legacy of slavery in the United States caused Black Americans to spiritually identify with the enslaved Israelites described in the Bible and to have faith that they too would be emancipated. After the end of Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow, these freed slaves were disillusioned. Some Black churches were more concerned with establishing their own hierarchies and exclusive groups than with directly challenging racist laws. Black people struggled to compete economically and socially with other immigrant groups, and it became necessary for them to craft a new identity to argue for a higher place in the American racial caste system. While Anglo-Israelism claimed that God's chosen people were those with power, Black Hebrew Israelism argued that God's chosen people were those who had been the most disenfranchised within the United States. It's important to note that Black Judaism and Black Hebrew Israelism are not always synonymous. Just as Black practitioners of Orthodox Islam are assumed to be members or former members of the Nation of Islam, Black Jews are often reflexively labeled as Black Hebrew Israelites. Black Jews have been born to Jewish parents, raised in mainstream expressions of Judaism, or converted to Judaism. Black Hebrew Israelites often refuse to convert, insisting that their interpretations represent true Judaism and that Jews, particularly Ashkenazi Jews, are evil. Complicating matters further, some Black Hebrew Israelites could possibly be ethnically Jewish. There are also Black Hebrew movements like William Crowdy's that were not anti-Semitic. Crowdy believed that Black people were Jews, but did not believe that non-Black American Jewish identities were invalid. Further still, there are religious groups that have intentionally or unintentionally adopted Jewish religious practices as a part of their own religion. There is nothing wrong with interest in or study of Jewish culture, but for groups like the Black Hebrew Israelites, there is more at stake. Israelite heritage was a way to assert identity, humanity, authority, and destiny from God.